All right, so let's move on. We have already talked about these rough times we're undergoing. We talked about the challenges that education faces in quarantine times. We have already talked about the drawbacks of technology. We have already talked about the characteristics of effective homework. And we are going to move on now to another big question we will be discussing in this module that has to do with whether we should be sending homework or self-study guides. So the first thing we are going to do now is define what self-study is. So you also have some photographs in the screen to look at, which very clearly illustrate what self-study is. Self-studying is a learning method where students direct their own studying. It's done outside the classroom and without direct supervision. So the question remains, is this what's happening in quarantine times? Students directing their own studying? It's being done outside the classroom? No direct supervision? I would say so much so. So how can we make self-study accessible? Well, the truth is that in normal circumstances, our students have their own preferred study methods. There are some students who are more visual, more auditory, more kinesthetic. There are some students who prefer working on their own. Some others prefer working in group. Some other students prefer certain types of activities. Some students prefer songs. Some other students prefer working on projects. There's a little bit of everything. And it's not any different when it comes to self-study, all right? So it's really very important that when students are doing self-study, they become familiar with different study techniques. And when it comes to different studying techniques, we've got the possibility of reading books or watching videos, with such a variety of videos today. Something that we will be exploring today, the possibility of creating mind maps or working with graphic organizers or any other type of activity. And what I have highlighted here is that the main objective is that whatever self-study technique students are provided with will help them process the information. So the question before was homework or self-study in quarantine? And the answer is that it should be a combination of both. That's why you've got the hand-in-hand image there. I really think that in quarantine times, homework should be different from the homework that we send when we have the possibility to give classes to the students at school. Since this is not the case, the homework, the tasks, the remote tasks that we send students need to have a little bit of the components of self-study guides, as we will be exploring in the subsequent modules. So we have already discussed a lot of very important things to take into consideration when planning remote tasks. So as I said before, in Module 1, this is just the beginning of it. There will be so much more coming in the next modules. But we are going to start in this module today. We are going to start planning quarantine remote tasks. I hope you're ready. Today, it's going to be a little bit of an overview, but we are going to go deeper as we move on in the next modules. So in quarantine times, homework should be a little bit of a mini lesson, simply because the lesson has not taken place at school. As I mentioned before, if technology is by your side, if technology is an ally, hopefully you can give virtual classes, you can record a video, and that's how you can give a virtual lesson if you want it. But what if you don't have those possibilities? Is there any way you can include that in some sort of self-study homework? I am a believer that this is possible, and this is what I intend to work on today and in the next modules. So it's really very important that we take a look at the importance of planning again. I always say this, I am a methodology teacher, and of course, I am a fan of planning. But as I always say, if you are an effective planner, then there are more chances that what you intend to achieve with your students, you're going to have success with. So I found this and I wanted to share it with you because I think it's so enlightening. Instead of asking yourselves, what do I want them to do, which is some sort of very typical question when it comes to homework or sending guides, what do I want them to do? Instead of asking ourselves that, we should move on to asking ourselves, what do I want them to learn? And I don't know if there's a slight difference between these questions. If you want it, it's just a word, but what a word. Because we are moving from what I want them to do to what I want them to learn. And learn, my dear colleagues, is a very powerful word. And when it comes to language learning, let's unwrap what to learn means in the language classroom. When we want our students to learn the simple past, or we want them to learn the present continuous, or we want them to learn the prepositions of place, we want them to learn the name of animals, we want them to learn conditional sentences 1, 2, 3. What does that mean? I want them to be accurate when framing sentences and questions, affirmative sentences, negative sentences. Of course, I want accuracy. So structure matters. But above all, when I say that I want them to learn those things, I say that I want them to be users of that language. I want them to use that vocabulary. I want them to use those structures. And most importantly, I want them to know when to use those words and those structures. So if that is what learning a language implies, this is what should be taken into consideration when we give them these remote tasks. And we are facing hard times because we are not there to present that ourselves. Even if you have the possibility to give virtual classes or record a video, it's not the same as being there in the classroom and smelling whether they understand it or not, if they got it or not. You know what I mean? So learning a language has to do with structure, but has to do with use and has to do with opportunities to use that. In what circumstances, on what occasions would you use that? So these are questions that we should always ask ourselves before planning a lesson. They are regular questions. Who am I teaching? Are they young learners? Are they very young learners? Are they teenagers? Are they adults? That's the first question. Why am I asking myself that question? Because depending on the age, there are so many things to consider. Very young learners, teenagers are different cognitively, physically, and emotionally. So asking yourselves, who am I teaching, is the first thing to consider. The other big question that you have to ask yourself is, what am I teaching? What am I teaching on this opportunity? Is it grammar? Is it vocabulary? Is it listening? Is it speaking? Is it a skill? Once you know who you're teaching and what you want to teach, the time has come to ask yourself, how will you teach it? How will you get there? There's no way you can answer how will I teach it if you don't consider who you're teaching. And there's a last but not least question that says, how will I know if the students really understood or if they really got it? And most importantly, if now they own it. So these are very important questions that we ask ourselves in general before planning any lesson in normal circumstances. So which are the questions that we should ask ourselves now in quarantine times? Are they any different? And the answer is no, they are the same questions. When it comes to planning these remote tasks with characteristics of study guides, the questions are the same. Who am I teaching? Are they very young kids? Are they older kids? Is it first cycle, second cycle? Is it lower primary, upper primary? They are different kids. Is it secondary? What characteristics do these learners have physically, emotionally, and cognitively that I need to take into consideration? The second question again, what is this remote tasks guide aim at teaching? Now that I know who am I teaching, of course, we don't know that well because we have had no opportunity to get to know them, but at least we know their age and some general characteristics. I also know now what I am teaching. The question is, how am I going to teach that? This question, how will I teach that, needs further consideration because I'm not going to be there with them. So this is a question that really needs a lot of deep thinking. And there's a fourth question that also matters in quarantine times. How will I make sure that they got it if I cannot see it directly? So what kind of tasks should I be providing them with that will somehow give me evidence of learning? So let's go step by step, question by question. Who am I teaching? Are they children, lower primary children, upper primary children? Are they teenagers? How do they learn? These are the considerations that every teacher needs to have. I want you to pay attention because in your guide for post-module activities, you're going to have some material to read about characteristics of different types of learners to bear in mind before you plan your tasks. The second question was, what am I teaching? So you have to ask yourselves, is it vocabulary? Is it grammar? Is it reading? Is it listening? Is it writing? Or is it a concept? It's very clear. And in the next videos, we're going to take a look at each of these questions. When it comes to vocabulary, well, there are lots of considerations that we need to have clear in mind, but we are going to see them in depth in the next video. So see you in a little while. Thank you.